Welcome to Map Your Mind. Travel through the world with your brain. Today, we venture into the heart of southern Africa, to a land cradled by rivers, crowned by waterfalls, and shaped by ancient stories whispered across generations. This is Zambia, a country where nature thunders with power, where cultures run deep, and where freedom was fought for and fiercely won. Zambia is not just a dot on the map. It is a soul carved into the land, a rhythm in the bush, a roar in the smoke that thunders. But before modern borders, before colonizers ever drew lines, this region was a cradle of thriving civilizations. Long before the world had names for continents, the ancestors of Zambia's people were living in harmony with the land. Archaeological evidence shows human presence here going back over 100,000 years. Hunter-gatherers roamed the savannas, fished the rivers, and left behind traces of their brilliance in rock art and ancient tools. Then came the mighty Bantu migrations around 300 AD. People speaking Bantu languages moved into the region from the north and west, bringing with them iron-working skills, agriculture, and organized communities. They built villages, forged kingdoms, and created a complex mosaic of ethnic groups that still thrive today, like the Bemba, Tonga, Lozi, and Chua. By the 15th century, powerful kingdoms like the Luba and Lunda were rising across Central Africa. They ruled with elaborate political systems and long-distance trade networks. Salt, copper, ivory, and even slaves moved across vast regions from the heart of Zambia to the coastlines of the Indian Ocean. These weren't isolated societies. They were deeply connected, part of a thriving pre-colonial world. But as with much of Africa, the tides of history were about to shift. In the 19th century, European explorers and missionaries began arriving, first with curiosity, then with maps, then with flags. David Livingstone was one of the first Europeans to step foot in the region. He was mesmerized by a waterfall so mighty, it looked like the smoke of 1,000 fires. He named it Victoria Falls, but locals had always known it as Mosio Itunya, the smoke that thunders. Soon, the British moved in with their empire, claiming the land as part of Northern Rhodesia in the early 1900s. Administered by the British South Africa Company, it was more about profit than people. They dug into the ground and found copper, lots of it. Copper would come to define Zambia's economy for the next century. Mines sprang up in the copper belt, and the local population was forced into labor. Traditional ways of life were disrupted, communities displaced, culture and power extracted just like the copper from beneath their feet. But the spirit of resistance never died. Through decades of colonial control, Zambians began to organize, to speak, to demand more. By the mid-20th century, anti-colonial movements swept across the continent, and Zambia was right in the storm. Led by figures like Kenneth Kaunda and the United National Independence Party, Zambians pushed back against British rule. And on October 24, 1964, the Union Jack was lowered and the Zambian flag rose high. It was a moment of triumph. A new republic was born, and Kenneth Kaunda became its first president, preaching unity, education, and Pan-African solidarity. But freedom came with its own trials. Zambia, landlocked and newly independent, had inherited an economy almost entirely dependent on copper. And when copper prices collapsed in the 1970s and 80s, so did much of the nation's economy. There were food shortages, debt crises, civil unrest. Yet Zambia pressed on. Democracy began to take deeper root. In 1991, Kaunda peacefully stepped down after losing elections, a rare moment of democratic maturity in a region often plagued by strongman politics. Zambians had spoken, and their voice was honored. Today, Zambia is still writing its story. A story of resilience, of people reimagining what development means, not just in terms of minerals, but in art, agriculture, technology, and tradition. Lusaka, the capital, pulses with energy, markets buzzing, ideas flying, culture blooming. Rural areas still struggle, but efforts in education and healthcare continue to grow. And through it all, nature remains Zambia's greatest treasure. This is one of the few countries on Earth where you can experience true, untouched wilderness, where elephants roam free and leopards move like ghosts through the night, where the Zambezi River crashes into Victoria Falls with raw, humbling power. Tourism is growing, and not just for safaris. People come to witness a land still deeply connected to its roots, to see ceremonies like the Kuomboka, where the Lozi king is paddled across flooded plains in a royal barge, to hear the drumbeat of culture that never stopped playing. Fun fact, Zambia is one of only 2 countries in the world that starts with the letter Z. The other, Zimbabwe, its neighbor and close historical twin. But Zambia is more than trivia. It's a testament to resilience, to reinvention, to the quiet power of people who remember where they came from and still believe in where they're going. So next time you think of Africa, Don't stop at headlines or safari snapshots. Think of Zambia. Think of its past deep as the mines it once bled for. Think of its people bold, patient, and unshaken. And think of its future rising, like smoke from the thunder, toward a sky all its own. Where will your mind travel next?